All right, let's jump right into this explainer of Dr. David Bauer's lecture on 1 Peter. We're going to unpack a truly fascinating piece of ancient text, specifically 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 12. And we're starting with a massive question. How on earth did early Christians find profound joy in the absolute darkest of times? We are talking about people facing immense pressure and targeted persecution, yet their defining characteristic was this unshakable hope. So, how did they do it? Let's find out.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, blessed by great mercy. Then, rebirth to a living hope, heavenly inheritance, rejoicing amidst trials, and we'll wrap things up with the Christian advantage.
Starting off with section 1, blessed by great mercy, the foundation of identity.
So we kick things off with a core identity shift for these early readers. Peter starts his message with a radically God-centered declaration. Check out this Greek word, anagonao. It translates to born anew or born from above. And what Dr. Bauer really emphasizes here is that this new birth is a 100% divine act. We're talking about a total rescue operation from destructive worldly forces like death, hopelessness, and utter despair. This isn't some self-improvement program, right? It is a radically new existence shaped completely by God's merciful help.
Just look at the contrast here. On one side, you've got the grim realities of the ancient world, human effort basically ending in despair and futility, and on the other side, God's great mercy. And here's the kicker. This rescue requires absolutely zero human merit. None. Dr. Bauer points out that this shared experience of receiving mercy takes these isolated, frightened people and literally transforms them into a unified community of God, totally marked by deep gratitude and wonder.
Moving right along to section 2, rebirth to a living hope, focusing on the future.
This new birth naturally builds into the absolute core theme of 1 Peter, which is a living hope. It's an orientation that completely flips how someone views their present circumstances. I absolutely love this quote from the Swiss scholar Bauer. The hope Peter writes about isn't just wishful thinking or some vague cross-your-fingers optimism. As Reiche points out, it's a hope by which one may live. It's an active, vital force. It's grounded in the historical fact of Christ's resurrection, and it makes life actually livable, giving these early believers the rock-solid certainty that life is in fact stronger than death.
Now here's a really fascinating theological nugget from Dr. Bauer. When you compare the writings of the two great apostles side by side, you'll spot a huge shift in emphasis. While Paul frequently anchors salvation in the past work of the cross, leaning heavily on faith, Peter does something entirely unique. He points us to salvation as a future reality secured by hope. In Peter's framework, salvation is primarily this massive event coming at the end of time, and hope is the vehicle that pulls the power of that future event right into our lives today.
That brings us to sections 3, heavenly inheritance, an imperishable guarantee. The crucial thing to grasp here is that this future hope is tied directly to a very specific objective reality, a heavenly inheritance. Now, in the ancient Jewish mindset, an inheritance always brought to mind the Old Testament promise of the earthly land of Canaan. But Peter is saying, no, this new inheritance completely dwarfs that earthly real estate. To really hammer this home, he uses 3 striking negative terms to describe what this inheritance is not. He says it's imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. Later on, early church fathers would actually sit around and debate the boredom of heaven, basically worrying that endless time would eventually lose its appeal. Well, Peter answers that centuries in advance. This is an eternal reality entirely free from decay, moral spoilage, or fading joy. Literally, we will never, ever grow tired of it.
Furthermore, this inheritance is kept on deposit in heaven. And it's not just sitting there gathering dust, it is continuously protected by God's infinite power. The Greek word Peter uses here is wild. It has deep military associations. It essentially translates to being kept in military protective custody. Dr. Bauer highlights that this divine, military-grade power is made operational through the believer's active faith, giving them this incredible ironclad assurance.
Which leads us directly to section 4, rejoicing amidst trials, the crucible.
Okay, let's be real. This is easily the most counterintuitive part of the entire text. How on earth could these believers be commanded to rejoice while their world fell apart? It creates instant friction, right? I mean, if God has you in military protective custody, why are you suffering? But you have to remember Peter isn't talking about everyday human struggles here, like catching a cold or having a bad day at work. He is talking specifically about intense, targeted persecution,
suffering simply for identifying with Christ in a highly hostile empire.
Dr. Bauer expertly breaks down 3 specific reasons Peter gives for these trials. First, they're probational, meaning God uses adversity to literally burn away impurities, testing and proving the immense value of our faith, exactly like fire refines gold. Second, they're relational. Suffering for Christ intimately connects believers to the actual sufferings of Christ himself. And third, they're eschatological, which means they're tied to the end times, allowing believers to participate in the final events right before ultimate deliverance.
Let's zoom in on that last point for a second. In first-century Jewish thought, there was this expectation of messianic woes, a period of intense, chaotic tribulation right before the end. So ironically, Peter suggests that enduring these specific trials was actually, well, good news. Crazy, right? Because if you were participating in the messianic woes, it was the ultimate proof that you were securely part of the in-group destined for that final, glorious deliverance.
It's also super vital to remember the context of Peter's audience. See, Peter had walked with Jesus, he saw the miracles, he witnessed the resurrection. But his readers, they hadn't. Because Peter's readers were deeply loving a Savior they had never physically laid eyes on, they were perfectly living out that famous encouragement Jesus gave to doubting Thomas. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Their sheer joy amidst totally invisible realities proved the genuineness of their faith.
And finally, Section 5, the Christian advantage, looking at prophets and angels.
This brings us to what is basically a massive historical plot twist regarding the greatest, most elite figures of the Old Testament. Talk about an astonishing reversal of status. Think about it. The most elite Old Testament prophets predicted a grace they never actually got to see. The heavenly angels diligently inquired and longed to look into a salvation they could never personally experience. Yet the first-century Christians, these persecuted, entirely ordinary people, actually heard the gospel and experienced the salvation that the greatest figures in all of history could only dream about.
When you look across this grand historical timeline, it really proves the sheer scale of the privilege Peter is talking about. The most ordinary, average Christian reading Peter's letter actually possessed a far greater salvation historical advantage than the greatest Old Testament prophets like Isaiah or Moses. They were literally living on the fulfillment side of history.
Ultimately, Peter wants his readers and all of us to realize the breathtaking scope of our position in time. For these believers, true existence meant looking backward at fulfilled prophecies, then looking forward to that imperishable heavenly inheritance, and allowing that future glory to break proleptically, basically to break in ahead of time, right into their present-day lives. It changes absolutely everything about how you experience the now.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative thought. If heaven is securely guarded for you in military protective custody, and if you hold a historical advantage that angels and ancient prophets literally only dreamed of, how will you let that living hope transform your present struggles today? Something to chew on as you go about your week. Thanks so much for diving deep into the text with me today, and keep looking forward.